conditions. Otim had 17 wives but fell deeply in love with Maggie, a woman of extraordinary beauty and mysterious charm. Despite her love and care, Maggie displayed strange abilities that unsettled Otim, such as stretching her arm impossibly long and appearing in 2 places at once. One fateful day, after a confrontation, Maggie disappeared, leaving Otim heartbroken and questioning everything. If you missed episode 1, make sure to watch it to understand how Otim's journey with Maggie began. Otim found himself thinking of Maggie more and more after her departure. The strange things he had seen, her miraculous abilities, the car that appeared from nowhere, and the long arm he witnessed through the window,
Jesus, my Lord,
lingered in his mind. But instead of fear, Otim began to feel a deep longing for her. He started to recall the love Maggie had showered on him, her laughter that filled the house, and her care that was unmatched by any of his other wives. Maybe it was a vision, Otim often told himself, trying to dismiss the unsettling memory of her long arm. Maggie was different, yes, but in the best way possible. If she were food, I would eat her every day, he would say with a chuckle, imagining her radiant smile. Otim's other wives noticed the change in him. He spent less time with them and seemed lost in thought, often gazing at the mysterious car Maggie had left behind. The house no longer felt the same without her, and Otim knew he couldn't go on like this. One day he made a decision. He would go to Maggie's village and bring her back. Otim packed a small bag and set off early one morning, determined to find Maggie. He carried the gifts she had given him, hoping they might help her recognize his sincerity. The journey was long, and as he approached the village, he realized he couldn't quite remember where Maggie's home was. The village seemed different, almost unfamiliar, despite him being certain this was the place. He stopped a group of villagers and asked, "Do you know Maggie's home?" But to his surprise, they all shook their heads. "There's no one called Maggie here," an old woman said, her voice firm. Frustrated but determined, Otim continued asking around. As the sun began to set, a man with a weathered face approached him. "I heard you're looking for Maggie," the man said, his tone cautious. "Yes," Otim replied eagerly. "Do you know her?" The man hesitated before speaking. "We have a Maggie in this village, but it is not a person. It is a snake belonging to a powerful witch. The witch calls his snake Maggie." Otim froze, his heart pounding in his chest. "A snake?" he asked, barely able to form the words. The man nodded. "This snake can transform into anything, a tree, a cow, even a handsome man. And yes," he added with a grim smile, "it can turn into a beautiful woman too." Otim felt his knees weaken. Was it possible that Maggie wasn't human? The thought was almost too much to bear. As Otim stood there, grappling with the man's words, he heard something strange. A soft, melodic voice called his name. "Otim!" It was Maggie's voice, clear and unmistakable. He spun around, searching for her, but saw no one. The voice came again, this time from the direction of the forest. "Otim, my love, come to me." Despite his fear, Otim felt an irresistible pull toward the voice. He followed it into the forest, the trees casting long, eerie shadows as the last light of day faded. The air grew colder, and a strange mist began to settle around him. "Otim!" the voice called again, closer this time. He stopped in his tracks when he saw a figure in the distance. It was Maggie, or at least it looked like her. She stood under a large tree, her radiant smile glowing in the dim light. "Maggie?" Otim susurró su voz temblaba. "Yes, my love," she replied, her tone soothing. "Why do you doubt me? Come closer." But something about her didn't feel right. Her movements were too fluid, almost snake-like. As Otim hesitated, the figure began to shift, her beautiful features blurring and transforming. In an instant, she was gone, replaced by the shadowy outline of a massive snake slithering away into the darkness. Terrified and confused, Otim stumbled back toward the village. He found the old man who had spoken to him earlier and demanded answers. "Tell me about this witch and his snake," Otim said, his voice shaking. The man sighed and gestured for Otim to sit. "The witch is a powerful man who lives deep in the forest. He created the snake Maggie to serve him. It can take any form to lure people and fulfill the witch's desires. Many men have fallen for Maggie's beauty, only to meet strange fates. Some disappear, others return, forever changed." "Why would the witch send Maggie to me?" Otim asked, desperate for an explanation. The man shook his head. "That I do not know. But you must be careful, Otim. If you truly love Maggie, you may need to confront the witch himself. Only he can tell you the truth about her." Determined to find answers, Otim decided to venture deeper into the forest. The next day, he set off, ignoring the warnings of the villagers. As he walked, strange things began to happen. He saw shadows moving where there was no one, heard whispers calling his name, and felt an invisible presence watching him. At one point, he came across a tree that seemed to shimmer in the sunlight. As he approached, the tree shifted and transformed into a beautiful woman who looked exactly like Maggie. "Otim," she said, her voice sweet and inviting. "Why do you chase shadows? Come home with me and I will make you the happiest man alive." But Otim knew better now. "You are not Maggie," he said firmly, stepping back. The figure smiled, her eyes glinting with mischief, before disappearing into the wind. As night fell, Autumn reached a clearing where a small hut stood. Smoke curled from the chimney, and an eerie glow emanated from the windows. He knew this must be the witch's home. Summoning all his courage, he knocked on the door. To his surprise, a frail old man answered. "Ah, you must be Otim," the man said, as if he had been expecting him. "Come in, we have much to discuss." Otim asked the old man. "Do you know Maggie, my beautiful young girl?" The old man told Otim. "Maggie is not a human girl. It's the name of a snake owned by a witch man who lives near the valley. That snake can turn into anything it desires, even a beautiful woman. Many have been deceived by its form, but it's no ordinary being." Otim thought the man was lying. He told himself, "This man might be trying to scare me so that I don't marry Maggie again. Maybe he wants to marry her instead." Otim dismissed the strange tales about Maggie being a snake and decided to try another home in the village. When he reached the next home, he politely greeted the family and asked, "Do you know Maggie's home?" "She's my wife, and I've come to take her back." The people exchanged uneasy glances. An elderly man cleared his throat and said, "Maggie? Do you mean the snake?" Otim frowned. "Are you saying Maggie is a snake?" The elder nodded gravely. "Yes. Maggie is the snake of the witch man in the forest. She can turn into anything she wants. A cow, a tree, or even a beautiful girl. Many men have fallen for her charms, only to regret it later." Otim couldn't believe what he was hearing. He shook his head and said, "No, that's impossible. Maggie is a kind, loving woman. She's my wife, not a snake." Determined to prove them wrong, Otim requested someone to take him to the witch man and his so-called snake. A young man volunteered, though reluctantly, and led Otim deep into the forest where the witch man's hut was hidden among tall, twisted trees. When they arrived, the witch man was outside, sitting on a wooden stool and smoking a long pipe. He had a peculiar look. His hair was wild, and his eyes seemed to pierce right through Otim. Despite his intimidating appearance, the witch man greeted Otim warmly. "Welcome, stranger," the witch man said with a toothy grin. "What brings you to my humble home?" Otim stepped forward, his voice steady but laced with frustration. "I am looking for my wife, Maggie. Everyone in the village keeps saying she is your snake. I don't understand what they mean." The witch man chuckled and asked, Do you mean my snake Maggie? No, Otim replied firmly. I mean my wife Maggie. She's a beautiful girl, not a snake. The witch man leaned back and stroked his beard thoughtfully. You're telling me you married my snake? No! Otim exclaimed. I married a woman, not a snake. As they spoke, Otim suddenly noticed movement from the shrine behind the witch man. His heart stopped when a large snake slithered out of the shadows, its shiny scales glinting in the dim light. Otim's legs felt like jelly, and he wanted to run, but his feet wouldn't move. Do you mean this, Maggie? The witch man asked, pointing to the snake. Otim stammered, No, 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 I meant Maggie, my wife. The witch man smiled slyly. Very well. He clapped his hands, and in an instant the snake began to shift and transform. Standing in its place was a beautiful girl, but it wasn't Maggie. Otim's confusion deepened. No, this is not Maggie, he said firmly. I want my wife, Maggie. The witch man clapped his hands again, and this time, another transformation occurred. When it was complete, Maggie stood before Otim, as radiant and breathtaking as the day they met. Otim's heart swelled with relief and joy. Yes, this is her, Maggie, my wife, he said, his voice trembling with emotion. He turned to the witch man and added with a nervous laugh. So, all along, you've been my father-in-law? The witch man burst out laughing. Father-in-law? Well, you could say that. He took a puff of his pipe and said, You must be a brave man to love my Maggie so much. Most men would have run away screaming by now. Otim grinned sheepishly, though his heart was still racing. He had forgotten what the villagers had told him, that the snake could transform into any form it wanted. All he could think about was having Maggie back in his life. The witch man looked at Otim seriously. Go home. Maggie will come to you tomorrow. I'll send her myself. But remember, not everything is as it seems. Otim nodded, thanking the witch man before heading back to the village. His mind was filled with mixed emotions, relief, confusion, and a lingering sense of unease. The next day, Maggie arrived at Otim's home, as promised. She was as loving and caring as ever, cooking his favorite meals and filling the house with her laughter. Otim couldn't have been happier. He told her, Maggie, if you were food, I'd eat you every day. But as days turned into weeks, Otim began noticing the same strange occurrences that had unsettled him before. One evening, while sitting in the living room, he saw Maggie's arm stretch from the kitchen to fetch a pot on the other side of the room. His heart skipped a beat, but he told himself, maybe I'm imagining things. Another time, he woke up in the middle of the night to find Maggie sitting by the window, her figure illuminated by the moonlight. She seemed to be talking to someone, though no one else was there. When he asked her about it, she simply smiled and said, I was just thinking out loud, my love. Despite these odd moments, Otim couldn't deny the love he felt for Maggie. He convinced himself that no one was perfect and that her mysterious nature only made her more special. But the villagers continued to whisper behind his back, making sly remarks that often left him both embarrassed and amused. One old woman told him, Otim, you must be the luckiest man alive. Most men get a wife. You got a wife and a snake in one. Another villager joked, If Maggie ever cooks too much food, don't worry. Just tell her to stretch her hand and feed the neighbors too. Even the witch man had his own humorous take. When Otim visited him to ask for advice, the witch man said, If Maggie gives you any trouble, just hiss at her. That always works with snakes. Otim learned to laugh at the jokes, but deep down he knew he needed to be cautious. He began praying, asking God for wisdom and guidance. He wanted to believe that his love for Maggie could overcome anything, but he also realized the importance of seeking divine direction in every aspect of his life. Looking back, Otim understood that his initial attraction to Maggie had been based purely on her beauty and charm. He had rushed into marriage without taking the time to truly know her. The lessons he learned from this experience were invaluable. To those around him, Otim often said, "Don't let beauty blind you." Take the time to understand someone's heart and character. Trust God to guide you in your decisions, whether it's in marriage, business, or any other part of life. And most importantly, don't be afraid to learn from your mistakes. Though Otim's story with Maggie was far from ordinary, it became a powerful example of the importance of faith, patience, and wisdom. It reminded everyone that life is full of unexpected twists, but with the right mindset and trust in God, even the most confusing situations can lead to valuable lessons. As for Otim and Maggie, their journey continued, filled with love, challenges, and the occasional moment of mystery. But through it all, Otim remained steadfast, trusting that God would lead him and his unique family to a future filled with hope and purpose. The story of Otim and Maggie serves as a timeless reminder. Beauty may attract us, but it is faith, wisdom, and character that sustain us. Let us all learn to seek God's guidance in our lives and embrace the lessons